Hey guys, welcome back to Make It Make Sense with me, Alicia Simone. We have a new format here. Instead of Instagram Live, I am now doing pre-recorded interviews. And so this is the first episode in this format. So I'm excited about it. Today we have with me Miss Faja, and she is a licensed social worker, and I'm going to allow her to introduce herself.
So my name is Faja. I'm a licensed social worker. So I have an LSW in the state of New Jersey. And I use my license being a school social worker as well as a therapist. But one of the main reasons I got my LSW was to be able to do therapy with people. So I'm here in New Jersey. I would love to practice in other states someday. And I'm working on getting my clinical license. That's what I'm doing right now. Working on getting my clinical license, which is an LCSW.
Awesome. So I have Miss Faja here today to talk to us about boundaries. So I'm just going to ask you first, what are boundaries?
So boundaries are things we usually put in place for, and I tell clients this all the time, like for yourself, right? And like to protect you, and that could be your feelings, your heart, even your energy. They're pretty much put in place to protect you. So they're not boundaries you put in place for everyone else, because a lot of times we put boundaries in place and people don't like it, right? Like if I am coming over every day to your house and eating your food, when you tell me, okay, you can only do this once a week, I'm going to be mad. Like, why did you put this boundary in place? But for you, it may have been, I'm spending too much money on food because I'm buying food, or when I get home from work, I don't want to see you and feed you. So it could be a lot of different reasons, but typically it's to like protect you and help you in ways that you find fit.
Yeah, that's what I think about when I think of boundaries, but I didn't always think of it that way because I'm still learning how to set boundaries, which is why this topic was really important to me because it's like you said, it's more of protecting yourself versus like trying to harm someone else or doing it for someone else. So I guess you kind of answered my next question with why are boundaries necessary? But when do we know that we need to set us like a specific boundary?
So normally, like I always say, check in with your feelings. And a lot of us don't do that. So we don't realize that. But sometimes you have to check in on your feelings and like, how do I feel about this happening? It could be something so simple. So like for me, I talk to people all day. After I'm done working, I don't want to talk to people. So typically, if somebody calls me, a boundary of mine, I'm not going to answer the phone. Or I may not talk to anyone. But that's just a boundary. So like checking in with yourself and seeing kind of like what do you need? Or do you kind of think that you need to put a boundary in place because something is happening for you and this other person and you don't like the direction that it's going in? That's a good sign too, right? If you need to put in boundaries with another person, like how am I feeling? Is this making me resent the person? Is this making me angry? Do I need to put a boundary in place for this relationship?
Yeah, oh, that's good because sometimes I know for myself personally, like it'll get to a point where I'm like burnt out. And then I get mad at myself because I'm like, you should have set a boundary before. But like you said, it's because I wasn't checking in with myself, with my feelings, and seeing what's not working and how I can fix it. So that's really good. Why do we find it hard to build boundaries? Why is it scary?
Ooh, child. So normally it's because, right, like you're taught kind of that to be that way, or you were brought up a certain way. So some people have like, oh, I'm the person in my family that everybody goes to. And when we look back on their childhood, it's like they were almost, and not intentionally, but like prepped to be that person. And so when it's time to set the boundaries, what happens is we consider other people's feelings and not our own. And of course, naturally, right, the world is like, you can't be selfish. You grow up like, you can't be selfish. You can't be selfish. You know, sometimes you need to be a little selfish and set boundaries and say, no, this doesn't work for me. Like checking in with your feelings, like we just talked about, and like, no, this doesn't work for me. But sometimes we're taught to kind of just be that person that everybody is just like, oh, I know I could always go to you. I know you'll always be there. Sometimes it's like, no, I'm drained. But I may put your feelings first. Oh, she's gonna be mad at me. She's gonna think I'm acting funny. But people don't put themselves first. They typically put people around them first in their feelings. So I think that's a really big, and it really is difficult for people in families, especially, because it's like, oh, that's my mom, oh, that's my dad, oh, that's my brother. And he's like, that's okay. And people do have a hard time putting boundaries for their parents. So that's why. Consider everybody else's feelings and not ours.
Yeah, but it's necessary, especially with family a lot of times, because it's like that expectation that you can just kind of go further than you would normally with someone outside of your family. Like they kind of push the line a little bit more. So when it comes to people that we are trying to set boundaries with, and say that they don't like the boundary, or they do get mad at us, or they feel some type of way, how do you suggest we handle that?
So one thing I always say to my clients are, who's in control of your feelings? And that's you. And you are not in control of anyone else's feelings, right? So when we set boundaries and people get mad or they don't like it, that's okay. Like, that's okay. We have to stick with our boundaries. And so even if they don't like it, that's fine. They don't have to like it, but it's important for us when we set boundaries to keep them in place. What happens is the other person usually doesn't like it, and then we don't keep it in place because we're like, but they didn't like it, but they got mad. But I just tell people, go back, keep sticking to it. Like, let's say the first time the boundary doesn't go well, go back and set the boundary again. But if people don't like your boundaries, if you want to tell them, you can. If you don't want to tell them why you set that boundary, you don't have to either. It's your boundary. And if they want to continue a relationship, it would probably be, and you're very firm on your boundaries, it would be best for them to align themselves accordingly, so they're not crossing your boundary.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I'm learning, so I'm just taking everything.
And there's so much that goes into, because sometimes people get boundaries, have things that come and cause boundaries because of trauma too. And I don't think people realize that because of trauma, people set certain boundaries. Like, I've had clients that are like, I don't like for me to sit down and they're standing up, like, and they're higher with an eye level. I don't like that. So if that's a boundary, I'm telling you as my mate, don't stand in front of me while I'm sitting down. That's like a boundary. So sometimes it comes from trauma too. And people will be like, well, but that happened a long time ago. And it's like, oh, don't say that to people, right? Like, if I don't like that, then don't do it.
Right.
So boundaries come from this topic could go so really big because they come from so many different places for people.
Yeah.
So if you have a mate that doesn't respect your boundaries, you may want to check in on that.
Oh, for sure, because that's one of the closest people to you. So, yeah, respect is a big, I would say one of the most important pieces of any relationship is, a mutual respect. So yeah, that's definitely important. So we're talking about right now building boundaries with other people, but now I want to switch over to setting boundaries with ourselves. Why is it important to set boundaries with ourselves, and what does that look like?
So it could look different for everyone. Again, because of why it goes back to why am I putting this boundary in place for myself, right? It's obviously a reason. Is it something that I can't stop? Is it a pattern that I continue to do, but I know it needs to be stopped? And sometimes people can recognize it on their own, or maybe they're in therapy and they're doing the work. But setting boundaries for yourself can be really hard because a lot of times you're holding yourself accountable. when sometimes you might have to tell another person, like, hey, this is a boundary I'm setting for myself. Can you help me out? If you see me doing this, or I'm doing too much of this. We have a hard time because it's us. And where a lot of times the self-talk is like, oh, it'll be okay this one time, or like, it won't matter. I'll do better next time. Like the narrative that we have. And sometimes we have to remember why we put the boundary in place, right? If I overeat and I say I'm gonna only eat 3 times a day, measure out my food, and have 2 snacks in between, right? But then I'll decide, well, it's Friday. Like, I want to have a little snack and an extra snack and a snack I shouldn't have, right? Like, I'm crossing my own boundary because I know I overeat. So having to set boundaries, you also have to think about long-term goal. Like, me setting this boundary, what is that going to mean for me long-term? So sometimes boundaries are, because I use food because that was just a simple one, but sometimes boundaries for ourselves could be a lot. Also, sometimes you can't hold set boundaries for yourself because you've never seen it modeled. Right? Like, if I have a parent that was never setting boundaries, I don't know what that looks like. So how do I do that? I just naturally do the same thing. Like, I love when I'm in therapy and I start asking people about their parents and like growing up, and they're like, oh my gosh, my mom used to do this and I tried to do that too. And then they're like freaked out. It's like, yeah, because we learn a lot of things from our parents. And although we may not act exactly like them, we pick bits and pieces and we don't recognize it. We just live in day to day. You sit back and you're like, oh my gosh, I do that. I didn't like when my mom did that. I didn't like when my dad did that. I want to stop that. I need to put a boundary in place. So a lot of it too is like learned behavior. We've never seen anyone put boundaries in place.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. I know that's something that I'm having to learn myself. Like, how do I even do this? Like, what does this even look like? I don't know how to continually enforce this. So I definitely want you to let us know where we can follow you, because you provide a lot of great wisdom on your page. I was actually watching your video when you were talking about boundaries the other day, dealing with self-care and things like that. So you have a lot of helpful information on your page. So please tell us where we can follow you.
So you can follow me on Instagram at The Thrifted Therapist. I also have a website, but I haven't updated as much. I typically, people contact me through there for like different things. But my website is www.thethrifteddtherapist.com. I'm also on TikTok, acting a fool occasionally. Because why not have fun? I do therapy content on there, but I do it like fun. It's not psychoeducation really. It's because so many great therapists already do that. So I like to do like the fun things and kind of joke around about like how sessions go. So I'm on TikTok. Everything is at The Thrifted Therapist. So mainly Instagram, though, TikTok, and then my website.
Okay, awesome. I'm definitely gonna add you on TikTok because we love TikTok.
Yeah, I'll be on there like, what can I do? And I love that when I see like other Black people are like, oh my gosh, I wish I had a therapist like this. And it's like, it's therapists out there like that, girl. Like, you want somebody to be like, girl, what are you doing? There are therapists out there like that, or, finding that balance. So I'm glad that people are watching and they're like, oh, that's what I want. And hopefully they can find that. And on my website, I have like resources where you can find a therapist. And I have in the state of New Jersey a list of therapists that I personally know. I'm going to start to broaden that a bit and go to other states, because I have been able to connect with other therapists in other states that I think do really great work, just based off of some of their own content and just interactions I've had with them. So I'll be doing that hopefully maybe this summer.
Okay, well, I'll definitely be looking forward to that, because I'm glad that you said that you're glad that a lot of Black people are, taking in your content, and hopefully it leads them to a Black therapist, because it's 2022, but I still hear so often, just how against people are when it comes to therapy, and just how scary they think it is, and all of that. But I definitely think it's important for our community to seek therapy if it's needed. So can you speak to that a little bit, just the importance of therapy in our community?
Yeah, so I will say this, and this really hits people a lot, and they're like, oh, the therapist goes to a therapist. I faithfully, my therapist has me monthly now, and I'm like, girl, you sure we could be at monthly? I think we should go bi-weekly. Like, I even go to therapy. The therapist goes to therapy. I think everyone should experience it at least once in their lives, especially as Black people. We have a lot of trauma, and a lot of things we normalize are traumatic. Like, one day I realized that a while back, and I'm like, we normalize that. Like, that's traumatic, that, right? A Black male get pulled over. That, and people like normalize it, but to be honest, or preparing their sons for that, that's a traumatic experience. There are so many things that we normalize in the Black community. And we're also taught, I think this is why a lot of us don't go to therapy. You know, you kind of taught like, what happens in the house, you keep that in the house, type of thing. And I get it, but it's a confidential space. No one is there to judge you. That's why I love therapy, because it's a confidential space. It's unbiased. It's judgment free. And you're talking about your experience, through your lens. Of course, your therapist may inquire about certain things, but it's to help you. People think they go to therapy to get advice, but it's really like you're talking through. And sometimes you're like, somebody asked me a question this week, and they were like, what do you think? And as they're talking, they're like, oh, I answered my question. I was like, there you go.
Yeah.
And that could just be me asking them a certain question afterwards to help them be like, oh, the aha moment. Mm-hmm. I know people are scared. People think they're going to go, oh, you go to a mental institution and things of that nature. But that's, if you felt suicidal, I have to make sure you're protected, that you're safe. But other than that, the space is so like, I always say my therapist holds a space for me that nobody else can. Like, I have some really dope people in my life, but I'm like, the way the space my therapist holds me. Mm-mm.
Yeah.
So it's very important. Like,
yeah. Thank you for speaking to that. Because like I said, like, I just hear it way too often, and it makes me sad, because it's like people that I know would benefit from therapy, and having that person that, like you said, holds a space, because that's true. I can speak to that. A therapist can hold space that nobody else in your life can, because they're not necessarily like connected to you like the rest of the people in your life. So I appreciate you speaking to that. So before we go, first of all, let me say again, thank you so much for joining me. Make sure everyone, you follow her at The Thrifted Therapist on Instagram and TikTok. So before we leave, do you have any final words of wisdom or gems that you would like to drop on us?
Well, I could say so much, right? One of the biggest things is I want people to start checking in with themselves, checking in with their feelings. And, I'm saying this because we talked about boundaries. And so checking in with yourself, honestly taking a moment to see how you feel and putting yourself first if you haven't been. And seeing if there's some boundaries you need to put in place, whether that be at work, with yourself, with your spouse, with your kids, your family. Putting in boundaries and knowing that it's not you're being the mean guy, right? There's things that you are putting in place for a reason. So really checking in with yourself and knowing that you are in charge of your feelings. You are not in charge of anyone else's feelings, unless you are trying to intentionally hurt someone's feelings. Otherwise, if you're not, the way they feel, you have no control over. So make sure you're checking in with yourself. And as always, one of my things I always say is give yourself grace, because we are our biggest critics. We be beating ourselves up and jumping each other, jumping our own selves. And it's just like, give yourself grace.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. This was great. Thank you for helping me kick off this new format of
yes, and I hope it goes really well.
Thank you. This will be posted on Sunday. And for everyone that may be watching, I will be posting on Sundays at 7:00. So be on the lookout for new episodes of Make It Make Sense, as we have other therapists and other mental health professionals coming through and helping us get our lives together and make it make sense. So thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you all, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.